when I'm able to introduce my friend and yours, Sharon Goodwin, who's a longtime member of the fellowship. There's a very nice bio in the description of her program, but to that I would like to add that she is a board member at large and also sings with our impromptu choir and is a poet. Many of you may know that. But Sharon shared with me recently that she has already compiled 2 books of poetry for self-publishing and is going to be working on 2 more. And that's why I have prevailed upon her to share some of her words for our opening and closing. And now, let's please welcome Sharon for today's talk on what makes me happy.
I've been staring at it. Oh, see, I'm short. Reminds me how short I am. Getting shorter as the years go by. Thanks for being here. I mean, I know it's summertime's a big deal to have many people show up because people are traveling a lot in the summer, and you tend to do that. And it's just so darn hot. So thanks for being here. The title of my talk is Things That Make Me Feel Good. Feeling good can mean many things. I kind of looked it up. You know, there are different kinds of things it talks about. Of course, happy is one of those things. But there also can be satisfaction, delight, joy. Those 2 words are appropriate for this month's services. Redemption and comfort. So it's not always just happy, but that's what we think of. That's what everybody thinks of. When you feel good, well, you're happy. Well, today I'm talking about how things that make us feel good are not always things that make us happy. I'm using my relationship with my father and a few other things as examples of that in my own life. I'm going way back in order to introduce you to my dad. In 1951, that's way back, when I was 2, tells you how old I am. My father moved my mother and I from Arkansas to Texas. He had never been out of the state of Arkansas in his whole life, so it was quite an adventure for us all. But he wanted a better future for his family than he could see really happening for him in Arkansas as a hillbilly boy way out in the country. Nobody had done well. They just all continued to live there. It broke his mother's heart when they did that because she had raised 4 boys. She finally had this little baby girl, and they were taking me away from her. So because of that, my dad drove us to Arkansas every month, at least once a month, sometimes more, just for a weekend. Now, mind you, this was a long time ago. They didn't have freeways then. The roads weren't that great. It was a 10 to 12 hour drive then. It's not now, but it was then. And to go for a weekend, 10 to 12 hours each way, that was a lot. I'm sure all that driving did not make Dad happy. But I know he must have felt good doing it because it made his mom happy. Because he wouldn't have done it for so damn long as he did, for a couple of years for sure. He was doing that and working shift work at a chemical plant. He did get a decent job when he got down here. And I mean, I, of course, didn't know when I was little. It's just something we did. But, you know, when I think back about it, I know that was a lot of work, and it wasn't a happy thing to do, but it made him feel good to do it because it made his mom happy. We all do things like that. So now I'll come push forward now. That was just to introduce you to the kind of person that he is. In some ways, that was the beginning of the modeling of behavior that my dad, my parents in general, made for me as a child growing up. I was very lucky to have good parents. and I credit them with many of the things that are good about who I am. And that I can see was the beginning. It was the beginning of who he was as a grown-up, always. In December of 1992, Dad was complaining of a headache that just wouldn't go away. That was really rare for him. He didn't complain about pain, and he never had headaches. He was also unable to get comfortable or be able to sleep, so he just wasn't feeling well at all. And the fact that he actually told us that was a big deal. On December 22nd, he called me and asked me to take him to the hospital. Of course, I got in my car and went right over. I only lived like a mile from them in League City at that time. He had not even told Mom he was leaving. He was waiting on the patio for me, and I got there, he got in the car, and we left. Now, my dad was an early riser, and my mother was not, so she was probably still sleeping at that time. So we go to the hospital, the emergency room, and they admitted him pretty quickly. I didn't know what was wrong. We didn't have answers yet, but they admitted him, so they knew something was wrong. So I went back to the house to get Mom and explain to her what was happening. I knew by then she would be up, and Dad wouldn't be there, but his truck was there. Because often he would get up early and he would get in the truck and go up to the donut shop in League City, which was where they always went for coffee. And Mom would go and meet him there when she got around to it. But then they would always end up there together. But the truck would still be there. So she would not really understand what was happening. So, but I went to get her and told her he was at the hospital and blah, blah, blah. And so I took her and we went to the hospital. We didn't have cell phones then like people have now, so I couldn't just kind of call her and tell her come. But then I didn't want her, because she would be upset that he was in the hospital and she didn't know anything about it. And so I didn't even want to deal with that, with her trying to drive and come there. So I went. And so we get back to the hospital, and by that time they had some answers. And they told us he had bone cancer. Now, that's a very painful cancer to have. He already had a broken rib, and that's why he could never get comfortable to sleep. But the headache was part of that as well, and it was not going to go away. So the next day, on the 23rd of December, they did chemo. And then on the 24th, we were at the hospital, and he was saying, I just want to go home. I just want to go home. And the doctors finally said he could go home for Christmas because they weren't going to be doing anything else over the weekend. The hospital pretty much wasn't going to be doing anything on Christmas Eve and Christmas Day and all that. So they did let him come home Christmas Eve. He didn't get to come home till like 5 o'clock in the afternoon. They were still fighting about it and trying to get the papers to let him go home. But he did get to come home. So on Christmas Eve, he was able to spend what we normally did on Christmas Eve, is when all of us got together at Mom and Dad's house, grandkids and all of us, and that's when we kind of shared our gifts and all that. And we did that. But it was, of course, not as happy as usual, but it was still happy because he was there. He could be there with us. That night, it was quiet, but it was good. The next day, we had our get-together for the big meal, the big holiday meal at Mom and Dad's house. And so we all came, and Dad was much more chipper. He was just smiling, which was unusual. He wasn't a big smiler. If you caught everybody else left, and I was always the last one to leave, helping Mom clean up and all that, that's what daughters do. And so I was started talking to Mom and I, and he told us that he wasn't going to do any more chemo, that he was done. And I'll tell you, part of the reason for that, and we were not shocked by it, is because several years before, shortly after he had retired, which is not unusual, I've been told, he had a heart attack. And it turned out to be pretty significant. But he had hidden the amount of destruction to his heart from the family as to how bad it really was. He just kind of did less things, and we were seeing more and more decline in his energy levels and his ability to, he would even try to mow the grass, and we knew better than to let him do that, and we would have to go take but he was still trying to be the same person, but he really physically he couldn't. And when he finally told us, Mom and I, that the doctor told him at this point he only had maybe 10% use really of his heart. It just was becoming less and less over time because of the damage that was done from that first massive heart attack. So he said, if I ever have another heart attack, just let me go, because what any more damage will make me unable to do anything, and I don't want to live like that. So we had that discussion before all this happened. And so we weren't shocked when he said he didn't want to do the chemo. We weren't happy about it, but we weren't shocked about it, and we understood. So on December 26th, after we'd had this wonderful Christmas, Dad went and laid down on the couch in the living room to take a nap, and when Mom went to wake him up because she had made lunch, she couldn't wake him up. So she called 911. Of course, the ambulances came and EMTs, and then somebody called me at home and said that the ambulance said Mom and Dad's house. And of course, I knew that was something with Dad. And so I got in the car and rushed over there. Well, mind you, my parents had lived in that same house forever, since 1954. They'd been there. And so they'd seen a lot of different families moving in the neighborhood and all that. But everybody knew my dad, because he was just that kind of guy, and he loved everybody's kids, and he would make toys for them and wood stuff, because he had all these fancy things in his garage that he worked on. And so everybody knew him. When I got there and I go in the house, the front door's wide open, which wasn't a surprise, because I go in and there's all these people in the living room. When they'd seen an ambulance, the whole neighborhood came. And of course it was Christmas time, so everybody was home. But they all came and were in the living room. So I walk into the living room and I see that EMTs have my dad on the floor, and I'm trying to find my mother, because there's all this crowd there. I finally find my mom, and I put my arm around her, and I said, he doesn't want them to do this, because they were getting ready to shock him and the things that they do. And my mom was just crying. She didn't say anything because she knew that. And one of the EMTs said, "What did you say, ma'am?" And I said, "He doesn't want you to do that." And she said, "Do you have anything in writing?" And I had to say no, I did not. I could have, because after we'd had that talk, I could have printed something out and written it up and gone over and had Dad sign it, because he would have it in an instant. But I didn't take that extra step to do that, because I didn't. It's hard. It's hard. But I didn't have. So they had to continue, because legally they would be in trouble if they didn't. So they finally got a heartbeat, and they put him in the ambulance to go to the hospital, and I put Mom in the car, and we followed the ambulance to go there. I knew in my heart it was already over, that my dad died on his living room couch, which is what he wanted, to be home. But we get there, and we're in the emergency room waiting area, and some other people had come there too, some friends and other family. And the doctor comes out, and as it turns out, the doctor that had been on call was my dad's cardiologist. So he knew Dad. He knew the whole situation and the strength of his heart and all that. He's the one who had provided that information to Dad that he didn't bother to share. And he came over to Mom and I, and he said, "We have a heartbeat right now." He said, "But I don't expect it to continue. How far do you want to go?" And I said, "No more." And he said, and I said, "You know that?" And he said, "I know, but I had to get you saved." So within an hour, it was totally over, and it was gone. It's a hard thing to do, but somebody has to do it. I felt good about saying that because it was what Dad wanted. I had promised him. It was a terrible day, and I was not, and never will be, happy about having to say those words. I felt good that I had followed Dad's wishes. It didn't matter to me what other people might think. The family knew it was right for me to say it, but it was still very hard to do. If we'd had the piece of paper, it wouldn't have been as difficult because they would have already had that information. When my mom got sick a year later, she asked me to do the medical power of attorney for her immediately, and we did that. Mom died on November 26, 1993, exactly 11 months to the day after Dad. Having that piece of paper was helpful, but it didn't really have to use it as it turned out, because she didn't die in the hospital. I just think if you haven't already done something like that, just think about it. It's really kind of a kindness to your family to have your wishes in writing so they have it. But like you've been told, and most of you know, I am a poet, and the poetry I write is always about my life. Everything I write, that's my diary. My poetry books are my diary. And a lot of people can write poems, and I could too if I wanted to. Just give me a topic, I can do it. But that's not what I do. When my mom was dying and we knew there was nothing more to do, I wrote this poem. The title is A Life, a Body. Saving a life and saving a body are not always the same. For a life is not just physical, nor is the state of pain. The body is host to the essence of the spirit of those we name. But sometimes the essence leaves the body, leaves the person, though the physical body remains. Our new medicines save many lives, or so the doctors claim. But saving a life and saving a body are not always the same. Okay, now something a little less sad, because there are many other things in my life that have to do with feeling good. Not necessarily happy, but good. In 1994, I bought a little red convertible. It helped me through my grieving. I felt good just driving that car, and I began to love convertibles that love lasted forever after. It helped me smile again. Shortly after that, I fell in love with Betty Boop. She also had a red convertible. She made me smile too. My friends used to joke that if I just dyed my hair black and cut it short, I would look like her in my little red car. I collected Betty Boop stuff, and it was all over my house. I still have things in my apartment now that make me smile that are Betty Boop things. However, I have stopped collecting her stuff and gave away some things over these last few years. I'll never get rid of all of it, though. Having things around you that make you smile is a good thing. I used to give blood regularly, especially when I worked at UTMB. However, after my diagnosis with MS, they wouldn't take my blood anymore. I always felt good about giving blood, and I was disappointed when I couldn't do it anymore. It didn't make me happy to do it. The needles hurt, but I always felt good about it. It was when I went to work at UTMB that I found the Galveston UU. Having been unchurched for years, I decided to check it out. I was so excited about it after I had found it that I talked about it with my daughters. They had never seen me excited about any religious thing and thought it must be a cult. They were very worried about me. To help them feel better, I asked them to come with me to church for Mother's Day that year. They were relieved after they sat in on the service and met some of you. That was 20 years ago. So those that have been around that long may or may not remember, but it was some of you. I felt really good about that, and it also made me very happy. In the year 2001, my son-in-law was hit by a car while trying to fix someone's flat on the freeway in Houston. He had to have many surgeries over a long period of time. I moved from Galveston back to League City to live with my daughter so I could help with their living expenses and stay with my 4-year-old granddaughter while Tasha was with her husband in the hospital. It was a difficult time for everyone. I felt very good about being able to be there for them. It wasn't a happy time for anyone, but it was a good thing for me to be there. That 4-year-old granddaughter is now the one that is blessing me with a great-grandchild in September. She is 28 years old now. See how old we are? Well, some of us are, not everybody. During the time I was living in League City, I went to Bay Area UU. I had written a poem titled Not and wanted to share it with someone. Matt Tittle was the pastor at Bay Area UU, and I showed it to him. He got excited and asked if he could put it in the paper. At that time, he was doing a blog in the Houston Chronicle called Houston Belief. I said sure. He changed the title with my approval to I Believe in God, I Am Not a Christian. This was in 2009. There was much discussion, and I have kept all that in a file of my own. It was really interesting, and I enjoyed being a part of that discussion. This is that poem. I believe in God, pray and give thanks, grateful for all I have, never asking for things for myself, but for those I love and those in need. I am not a Christian. Not everyone is, meaning non-Christians are also good people who love and give of themselves to help others. So why do many assume I must be a Christian just because I'm a good person? God loves all who love him, no matter how he is named. God is not Jesus to me. I was taught the Christian way. I talk to my grandchildren about Jesus, teaching kindness and forgiveness. I talk the talk and walk the walk, but I am not a Christian. There are millions like me all around the world. We love and are loved, care deeply about our children, are proud of our country no matter where we live. I can assure you that this discussion over that poem got very heated. I kept all that and read them again when I was preparing for this talk. I want to make a little booklet out of that poem and its discussion. I felt good when I wrote that poem, and even better when Matt Tittle got excited about it. Anytime someone truly feels what you felt when writing something like a poem is a wonderful feeling. I also added another thing to my list of things to do. We all have those. Put the poem and its discussion into a small booklet for my family to keep. My to-do list is growing. When my brother died in 2016, I was able to do a memorial service here in RUU. People came from many places to be there and celebrate his life. It was a healing event for me and made me feel good. I was not happy, but felt good to talk to many men that I knew as young boys who were friends of my brother. Catching up with people that I had not seen or talked to in many years. That's what memorials are for, the people left behind. We smile when it's over and feel good about reconnecting with people. But it's not a happy feeling. It's more gratitude that they came to remember someone you loved. It's the beginning of our healing. Sometimes allows us to smile again, to start feeling good again. You always see me jumping up to be part of our impromptu choir. That's because it makes me feel good. I'm not a great singer or just want to be in front of the room. It always makes me smile, and you see that. And that's a good thing. When I started volunteering at GUM, it made me feel good. Galveston Urban Ministries, for those that don't know what GUM is. It still does. Still makes me feel good. Many of you do volunteer work in the community, in the church, and many other organizations around Galveston that are doing great things for our community. And many of you volunteer time and effort and money to all of these things. And it makes you feel good. I know you feel good about it. I have a new quote that I just saw recently, and I don't know who said it. It says, "Smiling doesn't necessarily mean you're happy. Sometimes it means you're strong." That quote jumped out at me because I smile all the time. It usually means I'm happy, but not always. Smiling itself helps me to feel good, and it definitely makes the people around me feel better too. I hope you all do things that make you feel good, even when those things are hard and they don't make you happy. The good part stays with you forever, and that in itself is a really good thing. Thank you.